14th century. The Black Death swept across Europe, claiming millions of lives. The plague not only destroyed the foundation of society, but also triggered economic and cultural changes. But what if none of this had happened? How would the world have changed? In the first phase, we will discuss which histories would no longer exist if the Black Death never happened. Which parts of history would cease to exist? First, the progress and outcome of the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War was a conflict between England and France over the control of the French throne and territory. The war lasted 116 years. In the early stages of the war, England won a series of important battles. However, as the war prolonged, both sides fell into long-term economic difficulties and public fatigue. In 1347, the Black Death swept through Europe, striking both England and France hard. It worsened the financial problems of both countries. Ultimately, France revived in the early 15th century and successfully resisted England militarily. But without the impact of the Black Death, France might have been defeated much earlier, or the war could have ended sooner. The outcome of the war could have been completely different from what we see today. Second, the dramatic changes in Europe's social and economic structure. The Black Death accelerated dramatic changes in European society. The massive death toll caused a labor shortage, forcing European society to adjust. Land was redistributed, and peasants gained more rights and land. If the Black Death never occurred, the power structure of the European aristocracy might have remained intact, and the pace of social change would have been slower. Third, the delay of the Reformation and the strengthening of church authority. The Black Death was not just a biological disaster, but also deeply impacted religious faith. During the Black Death from 1347 to 1351, millions of people died, which made Europeans begin to question the Church, as the Church could not explain why this disaster occurred. These doubts and distrust accumulated over the next few decades. In 1517, Martin Luther published the 95 Theses in Germany, challenging the corruption and wrongdoings of the Catholic Church, especially criticizing indulgences. His actions sparked the Reformation, leading to the birth of Protestantism. If the Black Death never occurred, the Church's authority might have remained unchallenged for a long time, and the dependence of believers on clergy would not have wavered. The process of the Reformation might have been greatly delayed. Fourth, the rise of the slave trade and the colonization of the New World. With the Black Death beginning in 1347, Europe's labor force sharply decreased, which drove Europe to explore colonization of the New World and accelerated the development of the slave trade. European countries began to establish plantations in the Americas and transported large numbers of African slaves to the Americas. If the Black Death never occurred, the demand for slaves might have decreased, which might have slowed the development of colonization and the slave trade. In the second phase, we will discuss how history might have developed if the Black Death never happened. History might have developed like this. First, Europe's economy and social structure would have developed steadily. If the Black Death never occurred, Europe's economy would have remained stable. Agriculture and commerce would not have been disrupted. The labor force would have been sufficient. The social structure would have remained stable. Feudalism would have remained solid. The power of the aristocracy would not have been broken. Social class disparities would still exist. Peasants' bargaining power would not have increased. Second, the development of science and technology might have been delayed. The Black Death forced European society to seek new ways to address disease and social structure issues, which stimulated advancements in science and technology. If the Black Death never happened, the demand for technological and medical advancements might have decreased. The Industrial Revolution might have been delayed until the mid-18th century or later, and would not have developed rapidly in the early 18th century. Third, the development of thought and societal mindset would have been slower. If the Black Death never occurred, European society would have remained more conservative, lacking catastrophic shocks, leading to a deeper reliance on traditional beliefs and values. The questioning of the status quo would not have been as strong as after the Black Death. The desire for freedom, equality, and change would have been weaker. In this case, the progress of the Renaissance would have been slower. Traditional thinking would have been more firmly entrenched. Literary and philosophical movements challenging authority would have gradually decreased. The process of intellectual liberation would have been delayed. Fourth, the strengthening of trade relations between Europe, Africa, and Asia. The Black Death encouraged European countries to search for new markets and resources, and accelerated the rapid development of global trade. If the Black Death never occurred, Europe's pace of trade might have slowed down. Asia and Africa's trade networks would have continued to dominate global trade, and might have risen to become the world's economic powers in this process. The world map would have been radically different from what we see today. History is a one-way river, but we can think against the current. If that sudden plague back then had never swept across the land, the civilization we are familiar with might never have emerged, and we ourselves might have lived in a completely different world. One disaster's spread, the impact of a pandemic, is enough to change the entire world.